The first song tonight was composed by George Gershwin in 1927 and was written for the 1927 musical of the same name. There have been many notable recordings of this catchy melody, so without further ado, let's strike up the band. Glenn Miller recorded A String of Pearls in 1941. Now, the one thing that I knew about Glenn Miller, that he was an Army major, and unfortunately their plane crashed or got shot down during the war. But I just found out he was in the Army Air Corps, which is good for us guys that were in the Air Force. And the group that sang with him were the Airmen of Note, so this makes me a happier guy. Anyhow, this was done by Glenn Miller in 1941. Buddy Hackett played the famous trumpet solo in Miller's version, and it was ranked number 1 in the U.S. for 2 weeks in 1942. And you're going to hear solos by Mr. Dave O'Neill and Mr. Fenton Dungan. Say hello, Fenton. That's you. Here we go with A String of Pearls. The Little Brown Jug was originally written in 1869 as a drinking song. However, the version we're all familiar with was arranged and recorded by Glenn Miller in 1939, and you're going to hear solos by Mr. James Stages and Mr. Is that John Brown? John Brown. And of course, the sax solo was by Mr. Mike Seyfried. Now, this is going to be an audience participation. Does anybody know what the oldest phone number in continuous operation? Gentlemen got it right. The oldest phone number in continuous use is 212-736-5000, otherwise known as Pennsylvania 65000. Now, when you hear this sound, everybody shouts Pennsylvania 65000. 5000. 5000. I'm dyslexic every once in a while. It comes and goes. Not a problem. Here is Pennsylvania 65000. This was made famous in 1959 by Bobby Darin, adapted from the French song La Mer, which means the sea. Even I know that. Jack Lawrence added the word beyond to the title, made it into a top 10 love song of the 50s and 60s, and the vocals will be done by our conductor, Mr. Dave O'Neill.
Somewhere waiting for me.
Before we go with our next number, I'd like to introduce the gentleman in the front row, our saxophone section, Mr. Mike Seyfried, Mr. Fenton Dungan, Eric Strikefuss, Ross Enders, and Jack Knapp. Do you folks like Mexican food?
Yes.
I love it, but if you do, this number is for you. This is called La Noche de Burrito Picante. It's a great Latin chart meaning the night of the spicy burrito. Written by Mike Dana, it will feature several soloists, including the rhythm section. Everybody got it? I guess that's on. By the way, the soloists were Mr. Jack Knapp and Mr. Eric Streckfuss, and our one and only Mr. Tom Kelly on the drums. And, I forgot Dave. Does anybody feel sorry for Dave? They said no, Dave. And doing the part of Tweety Bird was Mr. Bernie Thompson. I get a gold star if I get the trombone section. On our trombones, we have Mr. Ray Matullo, Mr. John Brown, Greg Lucano, and Greg Clayton. I did it. Greg. This goes back to 1935. It was composed by Duke Ellington, and his best-known version was recorded with tenor sax legend John Coltrane in 1963. This version will also feature a tenor sax legend himself, Mr. Mike Seyfried. Here is In a Sentimental Mood.
Mm-hmm.
Seyfried, and the rest of the band. All right. Who did I miss? The back row. The back row is our trumpet section, featuring Miss Mickey Hastings. Yeah, I'll be all right. Neil, my buddy Neil. Neil Goldberg, Dave O'Neill, John Dages, Rob Johannesson, and the big guy standing next to him. He's going to have to wait next. It's all right, Josh. Anyway, this next number, the popular march, Glenn Miller recorded this in a swing version in 1942. Here is American Patrol. Once again, big hand for Mr. Rob Johannesson on the trumpet. And how many folks in the audience are veterans? Served in the military? Raise your hands. All right, this number's for you. Overnight? Okay. From now we're going to honor you folks, veterans, who have served in the armed forces. We're going to recognize each of the branches of the armed forces, starting with the Army, moving on to the Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, and the Marines. Nobody here was in the Space Force yet? Oh, okay. Here is Armed Forces Medley. And to all your veterans, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Our rhythm section, featuring Mr. Tom Kelly on drums, Bernie Thompson on piano, Josh Kovich on bass guitar, and on, as I was told, plain old guitar, Mr. Tom Kelly. This next number is probably one of the most popular. I'm turning my back to the audience. I'm doing good. Okay. It's one of the most popular patriotic songs in America. The beautiful, well, who put that? Tonight we'll hear arrangements by Tom Kubis that features Dave O'Neill on trumpet and flugelhorn. That's a flugelhorn. I never knew what it was. It's just bent wrong. Here it is, America the Beautiful, featuring Mr. Dave O'Neill. beautifully done. And I know you've heard those songs many times over, but it's really great to hear them in person with the big band sound, with great musicians like we have. Stars and Stripes by Forever is by far the most famous march written by John Philip Sousa. Tonight we'll hear an arrangement. No, we won't. 1987 Act of Congress made it the official march of the United States of America. This is called the big band version of Stars and Stripes Forever. Beautifully done. I was going to go home. The last song tonight really needs no introduction. It topped the charts for 13 straight weeks in 1940 and is one of the most recognizable big band songs of all time. This is In the Mood, featuring Mike Seyfried on tenor trump, saxophone. I knew that. I watched him play a lot. Eric Streckfuss and Mr. Rob Johannesson. Here is In the Mood. music. I know they enjoyed coming out here and playing for